The night my sister stood up at my promotion dinner and threw a glass of red wine across the table, right onto my white blazer, in front of my entire team, my boss, and 60 people who had come to celebrate me. My mother leaned over and whispered, "She's just emotional. You know how she gets." I said nothing. I smiled, dabbed my blazer with a napkin, and kept my face completely still. But that night, when I got home, I opened my laptop and I started making calls. By 6 a.m. the next morning, my sister's rent was no longer my problem. Her car insurance was no longer my problem. And the graduate school application I had spent 3 weekends editing, the one she was counting on to get her out of our parents' basement. I withdrew my letter of recommendation. They didn't know any of that yet. They found out at breakfast. But let me start from the beginning because none of this makes sense without context. And the context is 28 years of being the invisible daughter. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 31 years old. I have a master's degree in supply chain management. I have worked at the same logistics company since I was 24. And last October, I was promoted to Director of Operations, the youngest director in the company's history, and the only woman at that level in our regional office. My sister is 24. Her name is Brooke. She has never held a job for longer than 4 months. She has a car she cannot pay for, an apartment she cannot afford, and a habit of borrowing money she describes as just until things pick up. Things have not picked up in 4 years. My parents have 3 children. There is my older brother who moved to Seattle 12 years ago and has been largely exempt from family drama by virtue of geography. There is me, and there is Brooke. Brooke was the baby. She was also, from the time she was about 7 years old, the one my parents treated like a houseplant that needed constant tending, watered with compliments, shielded from sunlight, never allowed to feel the consequences of anything she did. When Brooke was in high school and failed 2 classes, my parents hired tutors and told her it was the teacher's fault. When she got into a fender bender at 19 because she was texting, my parents paid the other driver out of pocket and told Brooke it could have happened to anyone. When she was fired from her 3rd job at 22, my mother called the manager to ask why. I watched all of this from a distance that was never quite far enough. My experience was different. I paid for my own college applications. I took out loans for grad school. When I was 22 and struggling to make rent in my first apartment, I called my mother and she said, "You'll figure it out. You've always been the strong one." I used to think that was a compliment. I now understand it was an assignment. Being the strong one in a family that has a fragile one means you are never allowed to need anything. It means your accomplishments are expected rather than celebrated, because of course you succeeded, you're the strong one. And it means that when the fragile one acts out, everyone looks at the strong one to absorb it. For a long time, I did. I covered Brooke's rent twice in 2 years. I co-signed her car loan because my parents asked me to, and I didn't want her to lose her job over transportation, the job she lost 4 months later anyway. I spent 3 full weekends helping her draft application essays for an MBA program she said she wanted, even though she hadn't worked consistently in years, and her undergraduate GPA made it a long shot. I did all of this because my parents framed it as family loyalty, and because I had been trained since childhood to believe that my value in this family was proportional to how much I gave. The promotion dinner was supposed to be different. My company reserved a private room at a restaurant downtown. My boss, a woman I deeply respect, gave a speech about my contributions. My team was there. Several colleagues I had worked alongside for years were there. My parents and Brooke were there because I had invited them, because despite everything I still wanted my family to see this moment. I should have trusted the part of me that hesitated before sending that invitation. The dinner started well enough. My boss spoke. People toasted. I gave a short speech that I had practiced 3 times because I wanted to get it right. I felt, for the first time in a long time, like someone who had earned exactly the room she was standing in. Then Brooke's phone buzzed. I noticed her look at it under the table. I noticed her expression shift. I didn't know what she had read, but I saw something close over her face. A tightness I recognized, the specific look she gets when she is about to decide that someone else's moment is actually about her. My mother noticed too. She reached over and put her hand on Brooke's arm. That should have been enough. It wasn't. About 40 minutes into the dinner, when people were still eating and the energy in the room was still warm, Brooke stood up. She did not ask to speak. She simply stood. "I just want to say," she started, and her voice already had that edge, the one that means nothing good is coming, that some of us have been really struggling, and it's hard to sit here and celebrate when some of us are drowning. The room went quiet. My boss looked at me. My colleagues looked at me. I felt my face go carefully neutral, the way it has learned to over years of practice. Brooke kept talking. She said something about how success doesn't happen in a vacuum, how families sacrifice together, how she had supported me emotionally through hard times and just needed to feel seen right now. And then she reached across the table for her wine glass. I thought she was going to sit down, and instead she gestured too wide, too hard, and the glass left her hand. Red wine. White blazer. 60 witnesses. I do not know to this day whether it was intentional. What I know is that she did not apologize. She looked at disdain spreading across my chest, and she sat back down, and she picked up her fork. My mother was at my side in seconds, not to check on me, to murmur in my ear that Brooke had received some bad news that afternoon, that she was going through something, that I should try to understand. I nodded. I excused myself to the restroom. I stood in front of the mirror for 90 seconds, and I made a decision. I went back to the table. I finished the dinner. I thanked my boss and my colleagues. I hugged people, and I smiled, and I carried the rest of the evening on my back, like I have carried so many things. And then I drove home, and I opened my laptop. Here is what most people do not know about me. I am a logistics director. My entire job is systems. It is understanding how things are connected, where the pressure points are, what happens when you remove a single load-bearing element from a structure. I am very good at my job. I looked at everything I was providing for Brooke. The loan call rewrote my entire life, was the most significant. I had not thought carefully about what it meant when I signed it, but I had looked it up afterward. If Brooke defaulted, it hit my credit. I had been monitoring her payments quietly for 2 years, and she was behind by 11 days, on average every month, always catching up just barely. If I wanted to be removed from that loan, I would need to refinance. I started that process that night. The rent. I had been sending Brooke $900 a month for the past 8 months. Through a transfer she described to my parents as help while she got back on her feet. I opened my banking app and I canceled the recurring transfer. The recommendation letter. Her application deadline was 3 weeks out. I had submitted a draft to one school already and had 2 more pending. I logged into each portal and I withdrew the letters. In the field that asks for a reason, I wrote no longer able to provide an accurate professional assessment. The graduate school application was the one I sat with longest, because I knew it was the one that would matter most to my parents, not because they cared about Brooke's education, but because they had told everyone at church and in the neighborhood that Brooke was going back to school, and they needed that story to be true. I withdrew it anyway. Then I wrote a document, not an angry letter, not a confrontation, a clear, factual summary of every financial contribution I had made to Brooke over 4 years, with dates and amounts, totaling just over $31,000. I had every transfer record, every co-signed document, every receipt. I had kept them because I am a person who keeps records, not because I planned this. I just never threw anything away. I did not send it that night. I saved it to my desktop and I went to sleep. I should tell you what Brooke had received on her phone that evening because I learned this later. She had gotten a rejection email from the one graduate school she had applied to on her own before I was involved in the process. The school I had been helping her with was her backup plan. When she got that rejection, she had apparently decided, in the way Brooke decides things, that my evening was a reasonable place to put her feelings. I did not know this at the dinner. It would not have changed anything if I had. My mother called me the next morning at 8:15. I was already on my second cup of coffee. She did not open with, "How are you?" or "I'm sorry about last night." She opened with, "Brooke's transfer didn't go through." I said, "I know." A pause. "What do you mean you know? I canceled it." Another pause. Longer. "Honey, she needs that. Her rent is due in 2 weeks. I know when her rent is due. I've been paying it for 8 months. She's going through a hard time. Mom." I kept my voice level. I had practiced this too, though not as deliberately as my speech. I went through a hard time at 22. You told me I'd figure it out. She started to say something about how Brooke was different, how Brooke struggled in ways I didn't, how the situations weren't comparable. I let her talk. When she was done, I said, I'm not sending the transfer this month, or going forward. She told my father. He called 20 minutes later. He used the word selfish twice, and the phrase, after everything we did for you once, which is a short record for him. I said, Dad, I'm happy to talk about this when everyone is calm. I love you. I hung up. Brooke called at 9:40. I didn't answer. She texted 16 times between 9:40 and noon. The text started as confusion, moved to hurt, escalated to accusations, and arrived finally at the claim that I had always been jealous of her and that last night was proof that I couldn't handle her being happy. I read every message. I responded to none of them. At 2 in the afternoon, my mother called again. This time, she had done more math. She had looked at the car insurance I had apparently been covering. I had added Brooke to my policy 3 years ago as a temporary measure that became permanent. And she had realized that was going away too. You can't just pull everything at once, my mother said. She'll lose her car. She might lose her apartment. She might, I agreed. Those are hard situations to be in. She should talk to someone about making a plan. Why are you being like this? Like what? Cold. This isn't like you. I thought about that. I thought about my white blazer, which was soaking in a sink at that moment, because the stain might still come out if I treated it early enough. I thought about 60 people watching me stand in a room that was supposed to celebrate me, and instead watching my sister make it about herself. I thought about $31,000 and 8 months of rent and 3 weekends of application essays. Mom, I said, I've been exactly like this for years. You just never noticed because it was working in everyone else's favor. She didn't have an answer for that. I sent the document that evening. Not just to my parents, to my brother in Seattle too, because he deserved to know the full picture, and because I was tired of being the only one who carried information along with everything else. The document was 2 pages. It was factual. It contained no accusations and no emotional language. It was just numbers, dates, and descriptions of what each payment had been for. My brother called me that night. He had been largely absent from the family dynamics for years, but he is not a stupid or unfeeling person. He said, I didn't know any of this. I know, I said. Nobody did. I didn't talk about it. Why not? I thought about that too, because in this family, helping is expected, but needing something back is weakness. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that's not right. No, I said. It isn't. He didn't fix anything with that conversation, but it mattered that he said it. It was the first time in my memory that someone in my family acknowledged, plainly and without qualification, that something had been unfair to me. I have thought about that moment many times since. The following 2 weeks were not easy. My mother called every other day. My father sent 3 long emails that I read and did not reply to. Brooke cycled through several strategies. Wounded silence, furious accusation, and finally a long handwritten letter delivered to my apartment building that described her difficult childhood in terms I found creative, given that we grew up in the same house with the same parents. I did not respond to any of it. I was not icing them out for dramatic effect. I was genuinely processing, and I had learned enough by then to know that my processing time was not available for other people to fill. The MBA application situation resolved itself in a way I had not anticipated. One of the schools, not the one I had submitted a letter to, a different one she had apparently applied to separately, actually accepted her, conditionally with requirements, but still. She called to tell me, and I think she expected me to be embarrassed or to recant my position. Instead, I said, congratulations, that's genuinely good news. I hope you'll take it seriously. She hung up on me. I was not trying to be cutting. I meant it. If Brooke is going to build something real, she needs to build it without my scaffolding, because my scaffolding was never teaching her anything except that I would always be there to catch her. Maybe she'll fail. Maybe she won't. That is, at last, actually up to her. The blazer came out fine, for what it's worth. It took 3 treatments and a trip to the dry cleaner, but the stain is gone. My boss pulled me aside the week after the dinner. I expected it to be awkward. Instead, she said, "I want you to know that what happened at dinner didn't change anything about how this team sees you. You handled it with a lot of grace." I told her I appreciated that. She looked at me for a moment and said, "Is everything okay?" I thought about the honest answer, which was complicated. I said, "It's getting there." That felt true. What I have learned, and I think this is the part that is actually worth saying, is that being the capable one in a family does not mean you owe that capability to everyone else in it indefinitely. Capability is not debt. Competence is not obligation. For a long time, I operated as though my ability to help my sister meant I was required to, and that if I stopped it said something bad about me, rather than something honest about the situation. It didn't. It just said that the situation had run its course. My parents have not apologized. I am not holding my breath. We talk occasionally now, surface level, careful conversations that are more like maintenance than connection. I don't know if that will change. What I know is that I am no longer arranging my life around managing a wound that was never mine to carry. I still live in the same city. I still go to family dinners a few times a year. I just go as myself now, not as the family's load-bearing wall. And when Brooke walks in and the room shifts, when my mother's attention follows her like a compass needle finding north, I sit with my coffee and I feel something I don't have a clean word for. Not quite peace. Not quite grief. Something in between. Like land that has been cleared, quiet and ready for something new. That is enough for now. That is more than I had before.